Welcome back to Pastor Emilie's Story Hour. Today, we're reading The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. In the fields, how beautiful, how fresh everything looked. It was summer, and the corn was yellow, the oats were green, the hayricks were standing in the verdant meadows, and the stork was walking about on his long red legs, chattering away in Egyptian, the language he had learned from his lady mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the middle of which lay deep lakes. Oh, it was lovely indeed to walk abroad in the country just then. In a sunny spot stood an old country house encircled by canals. Between the wall and the water's edge there grew huge burdock leaves that had shot up to such a height that a little child might have stood upright under the tallest of them. And this spot was as wild as though it had been situated in the depths of a wood. In this snug retirement, a duck was sitting on her nest to hatch her young. But she had begun to think it a wearisome task, as the little ones seemed very backward in making their appearance. Besides, she had few visitors, for the other ducks preferred swimming about in the canals, instead of being at the trouble of climbing up the slope and then sitting under a burdock leaf to gossip with her. At length, one egg cracked, and then another. "Peep, peep!" cried they, as each yolk became a live thing and popped out its head. "Quack, quack!" said the mother, and they all tried to cackle like her, while they looked all about them under the green leaves, and she allowed them to look to their heart's content, because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is, to be sure," said the young ones, and truly enough, they had rather more room than when they were still in the eggshell. "Do you fancy this the whole world?" cried the mother. "Why, it reaches far away beyond the other side of the garden, down to the parson's field, though I never went to such a distance as that. But are you not all here?" she continued, rising. "No, faith, you are not, for there still lies the largest egg. I wonder how long this business is to last. I really begin to grow quite tired of it." And she sat down once more. "Well, how are you getting on?" inquired an old duck, who came to pay her a visit. "This egg takes a deal of hatching," answered the sitting duck. "It won't break. But just look at the others. Are they not the prettiest ducklings you've ever seen? They are the image of their father, who, by the by, does not trouble himself to come see me." "Let me look at the egg that won't break," quoth the old duck. "Take my word for it, it must be a guinea fowl's egg. I was once deceived in the same way, and I bestowed a deal of care and anxiety on the youngsters, for they are afraid of water. I could not make them take to it. I stormed and raved, but it was of no use. Let's see the egg. Sure enough, it is a guinea fowl's egg. Leave it alone and set about teaching the other children to swim." "I'll just sit upon it a bit longer," said the duck, "for since I have sat so long, a few days more won't make much odds." "Please yourself," said the old duck as she went away. At length the large egg cracked. "Peep, peep!" squeaked the youngster as he crept out. How big and how ugly he was, to be sure. The duck looked at him, saying, "Really, this is the most enormous duckling. None of the others are like him. I wonder whether he is a guinea chick after all. Well, we shall soon see when we get down to the water, for in he shall go, though I push him in myself." On the following morning, the weather was most delightful, and the sun was shining brightly on the green burdock leaves. The mother duck took her young brood down to the canal. Splash into the water she went. "Quack, quack!" cried she, and forthwith one duckling after another jumped in. The water closed over their heads for a moment, but they soon rose to the surface again and swam about so nicely, just as if their legs paddled them about of their own accord, and they had all taken to the water. Even the ugly gray-coated youngster swam about with the rest. "Nay, he is no guinea chick," said she. "Only look how capitally he uses his legs, and how steady he keeps himself. He's every inch my own child. And really he's very pretty when one comes to look at him attentively. Quack, quack!" added she. "Now come along, and I'll take you into high society and introduce you to the duck-yard. But mind you keep close to me, that nobody may tread upon you, and above all, beware of the cat." They now reached the farmyard, where there was a great hubbub. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, in the end, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that's the way with the world," remarked the mother of the ducklings, licking her beak, for she would have been very glad to have had the eel's head for herself. "Now move on," said she, "and mind you cackle properly, and bow your head before that old duck yonder. She is the noblest born of them all, and is of Spanish descent, and that's why she is so dignified. And look, she has a red rag tied to her leg, which is the greatest mark of distinction that can be bestowed upon a duck, as it shows an anxiety not to lose her, and that she should be recognized by both beast and man. Now cackle, and don't turn in your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart like Papa and Mama in this sort of way. Now bend your neck and say quack." The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other ducks, after looking at them, only said aloud, "Now look, here comes another set, as if we were not numerous enough already. And bless me, what a queer-looking chap one of the ducklings is, to be sure. We can't put up with him." And one of the throng darted forward and bit him in the neck. "Leave him alone," said the mother. "He did no harm to anyone." "No, but he is big and uncouth," said the biting duck, "and therefore he wants a thrashing." "Mamma has a sweet little family," said the old duck with the rag about her leg. "They are all pretty except one, who is rather ill-favored. I wish Mamma could polish him up a bit." "I'm afraid that will be impossible, your grace," said the mother of the ducklings. "It's true he is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well or perhaps better than all the others put together. However, he may grow prettier, and perhaps become smaller. He has remained too long in the eggshell, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." And with this she smoothed down the ruffled feathers of his neck, adding, "At all events, he is a male duck, so it won't matter so much. I think he'll prove strong, and able to fight his way through the world." "Well, the other ducklings are elegant little creatures," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you should happen to find an eel's head, you can bring it to me." And so the family made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling, who had been the last to creep out of his eggshell and look so ugly, was bitten, pushed about, and made a game of, not only by the ducks, but by the hens. They all declared that he was much too big, and a guinea fowl who fancied himself at least an emperor because he had come into the world with spurs, now puffed himself up like a vessel in full sail, and flew at the duckling, and blustered till his head turned completely red, so that the poor little thing did not know where he could walk or stand, and was quite grieved at being so ugly that the whole farmyard scouted him. Nor did matters mend the next day, or the following ones, but rather grew worse and worse. The poor duckling was hunted down by everybody. Even his sisters were so unkind to him that they were continually saying, "I wish the cat would run away with you, you ugly creature," while his mother added, "I wish you had never been born." And the ducks pecked at him, the hens struck him, and the girl who fed the poultry used to kick him. So he ran away and flew over the palings. The little birds in the bushes were startled and took wing. "That is because I am ugly," thought the duckling, as he closed his eyes, though he ran on further until he came to a large marsh inhabited by wild ducks. Here he spent the whole night, tired and sorrowful enough. On the following morning, when the wild ducks rose and saw their new comrade, they said, "What sort of creature are you?" Upon which the duckling greeted them all round as civilly as he knew how. "You are remarkably ugly," observed the wild ducks, "but we don't care about that, as long as you do not want to marry into our family." Poor forlorn creature! He had truly no such thoughts in his head. All he wanted was to obtain leave to lie among the rushes and drink a little of the marsh water. He remained there for 2 whole days, at the end of which there came 2 wild geese, or, more properly speaking, goslings, who were only just out of the eggshell, and consequently very pert. "I say, friend," quoth they, You are so ugly that we should have no objection to you with us for a traveling companion. In the neighboring marsh there dwell some sweetly pretty female geese, all of them unmarried, and who cackle most charmingly. Perhaps you may have a chance to pick up a wife amongst them, ugly as you are." "Pop, pop!" sounded through the air, and the 2 wild goslings fell dead among the rushes, while the water turned as red as blood. "Pop, pop!" again echoed around, and whole flocks of wild geese flew up from the rushes. Again and again the same alarming noise was heard. It was a shooting party, and the sportsmen surrounded the whole marsh, while others had climbed into the branches of trees that overshadowed the rushes. A blue mist rose in clouds and mingled with the green leaves and sailed far away across the water. A pack of dogs next flounced into the marsh. Splash, splash they went, while the reeds and rushes bent beneath them on all sides. What a fright they occasioned the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, when lo! a tremendous-looking dog, with his tongue lolling out and his eyes glaring fearfully, stood right before him, opening his jaws and showing his sharp teeth as though he would gobble up the poor little duckling at a mouthful. But splash, splash, on he went without touching him. "Thank goodness," sighed the duckling. "I am so ugly that even a dog won't bite me." And he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and pop after pop echoed through the air. It was not until late in the day that all became quiet, but the poor youngster did not yet venture to rise, but waited several hours before he looked about him, and then hastened out of the marsh as fast as he could go. He ran across fields and meadows till there arose such a storm that he could scarcely get on at all. Towards evening he reached a wretched little cottage that was in such a tumble-down condition that if it remained standing at all could only be from not yet having made up its mind on which side it should fall first. The tempest was now raging to such a height that the duckling was forced to sit down to stem the wind, when he perceived that the door hung so loosely on one of its hinges that he could slip into the room through the crack, which he accordingly did. The inmates of the cottage were a woman, a tomcat, and a hen. The tomcat, whom she called her darling, could raise his back and purr, and he could even throw out sparks, provided he was stroked against the grain. The hen had small, short legs, for which reason she was called Henny Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. Next morning they perceived the little stranger, when the tomcat began to purr, and the hen to cluck. "What's that?" said the woman, looking round. Not seeing very distinctly, she mistook the duckling for a fat duck that had lost its way. "Why, this is quite a prize," added she. "I can now get duck's eggs, unless, indeed, it be a male. We must wait a bit and see." So the duckling was kept on trial for 3 weeks, but no eggs were forthcoming. The tomcat and the hen were master and mistress of the house, and always said "we and the world," for they fancied themselves to be the half, and by far the best half, too, of the whole universe. The duckling thought there might be 2 opinions on this point, but the hen would not admit of any such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" asked she. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue." And the tomcat inquired, "Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" "No." "Well, then you have no business to have any opinion at all when rational people are talking." The duckling sat in a corner, very much out of spirits, when in came the fresh air and the sunshine, which gave him such a strange longing to swim on the water that he could not help saying so to the hen. "What's this whim?" said she. "That comes of being idle. If you could either lay eggs or purr, you would not indulge in such fancies." "But it is so delightful to swim about on the water," observed the duckling, "and to feel it close over one's head when one dives down to the bottom." "Ha! A great pleasure indeed," quoth the hen. "You must be crazy, surely. Only ask the cat, for he is the wisest creature I know, how he would like to swim on the water, or to dive under it, to say nothing of myself. But just ask our old mistress, who is wiser than anybody in the world, whether she'd relish swimming and feeling the waters close above her head."
"You can't understand me," said the duckling.
"We can't understand you. I should like to know who could. You don't suppose you are wiser than the tomcat and our mistress, to say nothing of myself. Don't take these idle fancies into your head, child, but thank heaven for all the kindness that has been shown you. Have you not found a warm room and company that might improve you? But you are a mere chatterbox, and there's no pleasant intercourse to be had with you. And you may take my word for it, for I mean you well. I say disagreeable things, which is a mark of true friendship. Now look to it, and mind that you either lay eggs or learn to purr and emit sparks." "I think I'll take my chance and go abroad into the wide world," said the duckling. "Do," said the hen.
And the duckling went forth and swam on the water and dived beneath its surface. But he was slighted by all other animals on account of his ugliness. Autumn had now set in. The leaves of the forests had turned first yellow and then brown, and the wind caught them up and made them dance about. It began to be very cold in the higher regions of the air, and the clouds looked heavy with hail and flakes of snow, while the raven sat on a hedge crying "Caw, caw" from the sheer cold, and one began to shiver if one merely thought about it. The poor duckling had a bad time of it. One evening, just as the sun was setting in all its glory, there came a whole flock of beautiful large birds from a large grove. The duckling had never seen any so lovely before. They were dazzlingly white, with long, graceful necks. They were swans. They uttered a peculiar cry, and then spread their magnificent wings, and away they flew from the cold country to warmer lands across the open sea. They rose so high, that the ugly duckling felt a strange sensation come over him. He turned round and round in the water like a wheel, stretched his neck up into the air towards them, and uttered so loud and strange a cry that he was frightened at it himself. Oh, never could he again forget those beautiful, happy birds. And when they were quite out of sight, he dived down to the bottom of the water, and when he once more rose to the surface, he was half beside himself. He knew not how these birds were called, nor whither they were bound, but he felt an affection for them such as he had never yet experienced for any living creature. Nor did he even presume to envy them, for how could it ever have entered his head to wish himself endowed with their loveliness? He would have been glad enough if the ducks had merely suffered him to remain amongst them, poor ugly animal that he was. And the winter proved so very, very cold. The duckling was obliged to keep swimming about for fear that the water should freeze entirely, but every night the hole in which he swam grew smaller and smaller. It now froze so hard that the surface of the ice cracked again, yet the duckling still paddled about to prevent the hole from closing up. At last he was so exhausted that he lay insensible and became icebound. Early next morning a peasant came by, and seeing what had happened, he broke the ice to pieces with his wooden shoe, and carried the duckling home to his wife, so the little creature was revived once more. The children wished to play with him, but the duckling thought they meant to hurt him, and in his fright he bounced right into a bowl of milk that was spurted all over the room. The woman clapped her hands, which only frightened him still more, and drove him first into the butter tub, and then down into the meal tub, and out again. What a scene then ensued! The woman screamed and flung the tongs at him. The children tumbled over each other in their endeavors to catch the duckling, and laughed and shrieked. Luckily, the door stood open, and he slipped through, and then over the faggots into the newly fallen snow, where he lay quite exhausted. But it would be too painful to tell of all the privations and misery that the duckling endured during the hard winter. He was lying in a marsh amongst the reeds when the sun again began to shine. The larks were singing, and the spring had set in all its beauty. The duckling now felt able to flap his wings. They rustled much louder than before, and bore him away most sturdily, and before he was well aware of it, he found himself in a large garden, where apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elder was steeping its long drooping branches in the water of a winding canal. Oh, how beautiful everything looked in the first freshness of spring. 3 magnificent white swans now emerged from the thicket before him. They flapped their wings and then swam lightly on the surface of the water. The duckling recognized the beautiful creatures and was impressed with feelings of melancholy peculiar to himself. I will fly towards these royal birds, and they will strike me dead for daring to approach them, so ugly as I am. But it matters not. Better to be killed by them than to be pecked at by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the girl that feeds the poultry, and to suffer want in the winter. And he flew into the water and swam towards these splendid swans, who rushed to meet him, rustling wings the moment they saw him. "Do but kill me," said the poor animal, as he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited his doom. But what did he see in the clear stream? Why, his own image, which was no longer that of a heavy-looking dark gray bird, ugly and ill-favored, but of a beautiful swan. It matters not being born in a duck-yard when one is hatched from a swan's egg. He now rejoiced over all the misery and the straits he had endured, as it made him feel the full depth of the happiness that awaited him. And the large swans swam round him and stroked him with their beaks. Some little children now came into the garden and threw breadcrumbs and corn into the water, and the youngest cried, "There is a new one!" The other children were delighted too, and repeated, "Yes, there is a new one just come!" And they clapped their hands and capered about, and then flew to their father and mother, and more bread and cake was flung into the water, and all said, "The new one is the prettiest, so young and so lovely." And all the elder swans bowed before him. He then felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wings. He did not know what to do. He was more than happy, yet none the prouder, for a good heart is never proud. He remembered how he had been pursued and made game of, and now he heard everybody say that he was the most beautiful of all beautiful birds. Even the elder bush bent its boughs down to him in the water, and the sun appeared so warm and so mild. He then flapped his wings and raised his slender neck as he cried in the fullness of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness while I was an ugly duckling." The end.